Have you ever noticed how we have this almost automatic tendency to try to fix everything? Life changes, things slip out of our control, plans fail, people leave, cycles end. And what do? We fight, we force. We desperately try to rebuild what existed before, as if the old was always better, as if the new were a threat. There is within us a restlessness, an almost irrational urgency to restore normalcy, even if that normalcy was already suffocating us. But pause for a second. Where does this yearning come from? Who said that going back to what was is always the best option? Are we not trying to freeze something that by nature is meant to change? The truth is that we have been educated to believe that stability is synonymous with security, that evolution is linear, that having everything under control is the ultimate sign of success. And when life shows us the opposite, we collapse. Alan Watts said that resistance to change is the root of all suffering. And he wasn't speaking poetically, he was touching on a wound that crosses cultures, religions, and centuries of human conditioning. Because accepting change is not something natural for us, it is a profound challenge. It's like abandoning a castle we have spent years building, even if it is slowly sinking into the sand. But there is something that is rarely taught to us. There is beauty in what escapes. There is wisdom in the unspoken. There is meaning in the void. And this is where an ancient, almost secret concept from the Japanese aesthetic tradition comes in. Yūgen, a word that has no direct translation because it does not want to be explained. It wants to be felt. Yūgen is the subtle. It is the invisible that carries depth. It is the moment that makes us silent because we know that any attempt to describe it would be an insult to its nature. And perhaps this is precisely what we lack when everything begins to crumble. The ability to feel instead of fix, to observe instead of react, to realize that the void does not need to be filled, that silence has more to teach us than any noise of promise or comfort. But tell me one thing. What exactly are you trying to force back into your life? What is falling apart, and yet you insist on holding on to? Stay with me until the end, because this question, even if you don't yet have the courage to answer it, will be explored in depth throughout the video. And in the end, I will show you how Yūgen, this concept as subtle as it is transformative, can be lived in practice in your daily life. And perhaps in this process, you will discover that what is falling apart was never really yours to keep. If this makes sense to you, take a deep breath. The journey is just beginning. Imagine someone who managed to take the millennia-old teachings of Zen Buddhism, Taoism, and the more subtle Eastern traditions and translate them to the heart of modern Western culture without losing their depth. That someone was Alan Watts. A philosopher, yes, but more than that, an interpreter of the human soul. Someone who realized, long before the modern collapse of meaning, that the Western mind was sick, suffocated by the illusion of control, obsessed with logic, and disconnected from the direct experience of existence. Watts was born in England in 1915, but it was in the United States during the 20th century that his thoughts spread like wildfire among artists, psychologists, spiritual seekers, and even scientists. He was not a traditional academic. His voice was not that of an intellectual trapped in theories. It was that of a man who intensely lived the contradictions of life, who sought ecstasy, faced pain, and surrendered to the complexity of mystery. In his lectures and writings, he did not try to convince you of anything. He did something much more radical. He showed that everything you are trying to control perhaps never needed control, that what you judge as error, failure, or chaos may just be the natural movement of life, unfolding as it should. Watts saw existence as a flow, and the human being as an inseparable part of that flow. The tragedy, according to him, begins when we try to stand out from that river, when we struggle against the current of impermanence, clinging to fixed ideas of identity, purpose, or security. That is when anxiety, fear, and frustration arise, because we start to live as if we were machines, not waves within an ocean. But what makes his voice even more necessary today is the silent collapse that plagues millions of people trapped in a world of hyper-productivity, idealized self-image, and instant gratification. We live in the age of anxiety and comparison. Spirituality has become a product. Self-knowledge has become performance. And the ability to simply be, to feel, contemplate, exist without needing to optimize everything has been replaced by the compulsion to have answers. Alan Watts reminds us of what we have forgotten, that life is not a problem to be solved, but a dance to be danced, that the mystery does not need to be deciphered, it needs to be lived, and that perhaps the healthiest thing someone can do today is to unlearn. Unlearn to control, to label, to demand, and relearn to perceive what is always present, but rarely noticed. And it is here that the philosophy of Yūgen comes in full force, because what Watts conveyed, even without naming it, was exactly that, the feeling of the ineffable, the fascination with the hidden, the subtle, the unexplainable. But that changes everything. In the next section, we will dive deep into this ancestral concept. What is Yūgen? Where does it come from? And why might it be exactly what you were looking for, even without knowing? If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. There are words that carry the weight of centuries, yet at the same time float like dust in the light. Yūgen is one of those words. A Japanese concept as ancient as it is profound, it escapes any literal translation. Trying to explain it accurately is like trying to catch the wind with your hands. Yet, we still feel its presence. It manifests in almost imperceptible moments. A distant sound of bells on a foggy morning, the fall of a leaf in autumn, a glance that says more than 1,000 words, the silence that precedes a tear. In Japanese aesthetic tradition, Yūgen represents a beauty that does not reveal itself directly. It is not the obvious brightness of colors, nor the evident grandeur of a landscape. It is what lies behind in the subtext. It is what moves us without us knowing why. It is the intimate recognition that there is something much greater, deeper, more mysterious than what the eyes can see or the mind can comprehend. The origin of the concept dates back to the 12th century, deeply influenced by Zen Buddhism and the sensitivity of no theater, haiku poetry, and minimalist art. In all these expressions, Yūgen is not in what is shown, but in what is suggested. Art does not explain, it points. And in that silent pointing, it invites us to dive into the invisible, not with the eyes, but with the soul. Yūgen is also acceptance. It is the recognition of the impermanence of all things. There is no struggle against time. There is no desire to eternalize moments. On the contrary, there is a deep respect for the ephemeral, for the shadow that moves slowly at the end of the afternoon, for the breeze that gently sways the curtain, for the sound of footsteps fading away. All of this is Yūgen, and all of this is life in its most honest form. Alan Watts, even without using the term directly in many of his speeches, masterfully translated this spirit. He said that life is like music. The purpose is not to reach the last note as quickly as possible, but to savor each measure, each pause, each vibration that dissolves in the air. Yūgen is exactly that. The pause, the unspoken, the silent reverence for what will never be fully understood, and for that reason, is sacred. And here lies the crucial point. In a society obsessed with clarity, productivity, logic, and exposure, Yūgen is an act of resistance. It is a reminder that not everything needs to be said, explained, or posted, that there is immense power in contemplating something just for the sake of contemplation. That mystery, far from being a problem, is a portal. But how does this connect with Alan Watts in a profound way? How does his philosophy directly engage with this invisible aesthetic, this eloquent silence that is the heart of Yūgen? This is exactly what we will explore in the next part, because Watts not only spoke about it, he lived it. Alan Watts was not just a scholar of Eastern philosophy, he was an artist of thought, an alchemist of words, someone who knew how to capture the essence of the invisible and return it to the world with an almost poetic clarity. And that is why the connection between his philosophy and the concept of Yūgen is not a coincidence. It is a natural symbiosis. Even when he did not directly name this Japanese term, everything Watts taught vibrated on the same frequency as Yūgen. A reverence for mystery, a surrender to the uncontrollable, a yielding to the silent flow of existence. Watts often said that life is like a river, and that suffering begins when we try to swim against the current. This is Yūgen in essence. Because Yūgen does not impose itself, it reveals itself when you stop fighting. It does not shout, it whispers. And Watts called us exactly to that, to listen to the whisper behind reality, to abandon the illusion that everything needs to be deciphered and simply allow ourselves to feel what cannot be explained. In his lectures, he often used images that evoke this hidden beauty, a candle that extinguishes itself, a bamboo swaying in the wind, the sound of rain on dead leaves. Every metaphor he used was a bridge to Yūgen, even if he never said that name. He taught that the rational mind, when it tries to capture the absolute, becomes frustrated, because the absolute cannot fit into formulas, theories, or doctrines. The absolute is in the present, in the moment, in the direct experience of life as it is, not as we would like it to be. Watts also had a deep sense of humor, and this is important, because Yūgen is not heavy melancholy. It is deep lightness. It is knowing that life is impermanent, full of contradictions, yes, but still beautiful, absurd, and fascinating. Watts said that taking everything too seriously is to forget that existence is, at its core, a cosmic play, and that laughing at oneself, at the search for meaning, at one's own suffering, is also a form of wisdom. Deep down, Alan Watts gently pushed us out of the ego trap. He said, "Stop trying to be someone, just be. Stop trying to understand everything, just live." And in this call, he echoed exactly the spirit of Yūgen, which does not want you to understand, it wants you to feel. But what happens when we resist this invitation? When we insist on swimming against the flow? When we desperately try to reconstruct what life has already shown us needs to be left behind? What does this cost us, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually? This is what we will confront now, because before learning to surrender to the mystery, you need to understand the weight of resisting it. Resisting change is like trying to hold sand with clenched fists. The harder you try, the more it slips away. Yet, this is what most of us attempt to do when life begins to transform. Something ends, someone departs, a phase dissolves, and instinctively we seek to restore what was, as if it were possible to glue the shards of a mirror and see the same reflection as before. But the truth, brutal and liberating at the same time, is that certain things were not meant to return. And insisting on this only deepens the pain. Resistance creates tension in the body, in the mind, in the soul. It manifests as chronic anxiety, as insomnia, as that constant feeling of being out of place. It's not just the fact that something has changed, it's the refusal to accept that it has changed. We live in denial, trying to recreate the past, projecting a future that returns to us what no longer belongs on our path. And with that, we stop living in the present, the only place where life truly happens. Alan Watts saw this with surgical clarity. He said, "You are not separate from the universe. You are part of it, just as a wave is part of the ocean." So why do we try to swim against the natural movement of the tides? Why do we think our small individual should prevail over the infinite flow of existence? The answer lies in fear. Fear of losing control, fear of emptiness, fear of not knowing who we are when everything that defined us begins to crumble. But here's the point. This fear only exists because we believe we are separate from the whole. We believe we need to make life work, as if it depended solely on our decisions, our plans, our willpower. And that is a burden too heavy for any human being to carry. The good news is that there is immense relief in letting go. It's not about giving up, but about surrendering. It's like releasing a rope that has been taut for so long that you don't even remember what it was like to live without pain. When you stop resisting, reality ceases to be an enemy and becomes a teacher. And even that which seems like destruction, the end of a relationship, the loss of stability, the death of a future idea, begins to be seen as part of a larger cycle. A cycle that you don't need to control, just understand. This is the first step toward freedom. Recognizing that suffering does not come from change itself, but from the struggle against it. When you understand this, a new space begins to emerge. A space where the beauty of the invisible can finally be perceived. A space where Yūgen can emerge. But how to cultivate this perception? How, in practice, to bring this deeper gaze into everyday life, into small actions, into the seemingly mundane moments of life? The answer lies in the next part, and perhaps it is much simpler and more transformative than you imagine. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebook, Beyond the Shadow. It breaks down Jung's core ideas and gives you tools to understand yourself more deeply. Link is in the pinned comment. If there is something that Alan Watts taught us masterfully, it is that wisdom does not reside in abstract ideas, but in the way we live the now. And the concept of Yūgen, as mysterious as it may seem, is not something reserved for monks, artists, or philosophers. On the contrary, Yūgen is within everyone's reach, all the time. You just need to learn to look. But the gaze needs to be different. Not the gaze that seeks explanations, diagnoses, solutions. That is the gaze of the ego, trained to control and conquer. The gaze that accesses Yūgen is silent, contemplative, and often uncomfortable, because it demands that you do not interfere. It requires you to witness. So how can we bring this into our daily lives? The first practice is to slow down. In a world where everything is measured by productivity, stopping is a revolutionary act. And stopping here does not mean doing nothing. It means being present. It means sipping a coffee while watching the steam rise. It means walking aimlessly while listening to your own footsteps. It means listening to someone without preparing a response. It means allowing the moment to have value in itself, without purpose, without haste. The second practice is to cultivate silence. Not just external silence, but internal silence. This can start with brief pauses during the day, 5 minutes where you simply sit and observe your breath, or listen to the sounds around you without trying to classify them. Silence is the fertile ground where Yūgen flourishes, because when the mind quiets, the mystery reveals itself. The third practice is to abandon excess. We live surrounded by stimuli, information, opinions, notifications. Yūgen happens in the space between these things. So create that space, reduce the noise, let go of being right, let go of always having something to say. Let go for a moment of the need to be someone. In that emptiness, something begins to shine, something subtle yet profound. It is like the light of the moon reflected on water. You cannot touch it, but it is there, saying something that words cannot reach. Another way to cultivate Yūgen is through art, not as production, but as enjoyment. Listening to a piece of music without knowing its genre, reading a poem and not trying to interpret it, looking at a painting and just feeling. Art, when not instrumentalized, trains us to inhabit the ambiguous, and the ambiguous is the dwelling of Yūgen. Finally, practice non-doing. This may be the most difficult for the modern mind, accustomed to measuring value by utility, but there is an ancestral wisdom in not acting, in contemplating, in waiting. Sometimes, doing nothing is the most powerful gesture, because it is in that space that we perceive what is always here, but goes unnoticed, the flow of life unfolding with, or without, our interference. By practicing these small actions, you begin to change the structure of your attention, and attention is everything. What's said that you are what you pay attention to? If your attention is always on what is lacking, you live in scarcity. If it is on what is being born, even if it is invisible, you live in mystery. But there is still an essential question to be asked. Why does all this matter? What is the purpose of accessing this subtle beauty, this deep silence, this state of surrender? What really happens when we live from this perspective? The answer lies in the next and final part. And it may change the way you see yourself and the world around you. Most people live as if they are constantly chasing something, an answer, a happy ending, a plan that works, a definitive meaning. And when life doesn't cooperate, when it changes direction without warning, dismantles certainties, takes away what we thought was guaranteed, we panic. We try to force it back. We try to fix, stitch, redo. But perhaps the deepest lesson Alan Watts left us is exactly this. You don't need to fix life. You need to dance with it. Life is not a problem to be solved. It is a play, a song, a poem. And like any work of art, it doesn't need to have a logical purpose. The value lies in the experience, not in the explanation. Watts said that, when you try to grasp water, it slips through your fingers, but when you open your hands, it stays. This is the spirit of Yūgen. What is subtle, what is invisible, what escapes, is exactly what matters most. Letting life flow doesn't mean apathy. It's not giving up, nor being passive in the face of pain. It's something else. It's trusting. It's knowing that there is a greater intelligence operating in the shadows, a deep order that does not reveal itself to those who try to control it, but to those who learn to listen to it. And to listen, one must quiet the mind, calm the ego, and open the heart. When you abandon the obsession for answers, a new space emerges within you. A space where silence is not emptiness, but fullness. Where absence is not loss, but liberation. Where mystery is not a threat, but an invitation. And it is in this space that Yūgen settles, not as a concept, but as a state of being. You begin to realize that beauty lies in the intervals, in the cycles, in the ends that become beginnings, and above all, in what you can never possess. The light changes, the seasons pass, people come and go, and all of this is poetry. Yūgen is not something to be sought. It is something to be allowed. And the only condition to live it is this: stop trying to force life back to what it was. Let it be what it is trying to become. If this touched something within you, comment below, "I am ready to let go," or write what you are learning to accept. Because sometimes naming what we feel is the first step to liberation. And if this message resonated with you, continue the journey. The next video is as important as this one. perhaps even more. It deepens this surrender and shows you what comes next. Trust, watch, and remember, life is not a goal. It is a mystery in motion. Let yourself be carried away.